He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I'm your host, Taylor, and today we're stepping back into the paranormal realm with a few ghostly encounters. But before we dive into that, though, you can find us directly through your email via cryptidclues@gmail.com. And you can find a plethora of content on YouTube or whatever podcast player that you tune into. We got quite a few years worth of content cataloged for you guys to enjoy and just explore and learn, so I definitely recommend take a gander. These past few weeks, we've been exploring a lot of Sasquatch, but just last week, we took a look at Venezuela and discussed a few paranormal entities and legends that exist there, which is leading us into today's first encounter. And I quote, "I lived in this house with a basement, and every time I walked up the stairs, I would get this weird, creepy goosebumps feeling on the back of my neck. It didn't make me uneasy to go down the stairs or to be in the basement. My craft room was down there, and I spent a lot of time there. After a while, I would have items I was using disappear. When I would look away from them, I would search, and one day I got frustrated, no one in particular, and I just said, can I please have my scissors back? Now, I just looked under the pile of new mail, and when I turned my head, there were my scissors on top of the pile of mail. I talked to my neighbor, and she told me that the original owner of the house was a jolly old man who loved to prank people. That he had fell coming up the stairs one day and actually died. Now, I think the goosebumps were him trying to tell me to be careful, and every time after that, when something would disappear, I would politely ask for it back, and it would appear in the place that I could not have missed it before. Thanks, old man, it was fun." End quote. That's going to tie in full circle when we get to the end of this episode. The idea of talking or putting your words to use when you're dealing with the paranormal. And of course, objects moving around can be affiliated with poltergeist activity. But one such notion is that of communication. Like this person implied, he felt that the goosebumps were to be careful while they're on the stairs. If indeed, again, it's his interpretation that there was a man that lived in this home and he died going up the stairs. And it's a fair analogy, I would say. He's not feeling threatened, and I don't think, and I say this loosely, when you're in a situation with the paranormal, that if you are feeling threatened, you're going to know that you're being threatened. But not all paranormal cases are bad, and that's kind of what we're highlighting in this episode today, of just certain paranormal hauntings that are just existing amongst individuals that reside in certain places. Now, on that note, knowing the history of where you are, it helps to understand it if you are being haunted, the context of your resident ghost. And of course, like I said, there are less than kind entities that will capitalize on your discomfort and almost relish in the pain that they cause. And then when you get to demons, well, that's another can of worms entirely. And I quote, "I'm a lover of horror, supernatural, creepy things. I spent a lot of my teens and childhood ghost hunting with my friends in random graveyards, run-down neighborhoods, abandoned factories, etc. That being said, we never really encountered anything other than psychosomatic ghosts that our overactive imagination created. Despite loving horror, I didn't really believe that any sort of corporeal ghosts were real. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family, and we stayed in Germany in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double on the second floor, my sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. Now we went to check into our rooms. As soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I walked into a wall of bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues other than waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air was crushing. It unnerved me even more that I was not the only one who felt weirded out. Plus, she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented in my head that the wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully when at about 2 a.m., I'm woken by something ripping the covers off me and being jerked about 2 feet towards the end of the bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into my room because when I turned towards what had grabbed me, a huge looming black shape was visible in the darkness. Like a man was in my room. Now I frantically flipped the light on, only to have there be nothing there. The window was locked from the inside, there was no one in the closet or the bathroom, and my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night, scared shitless, playing Cooking Mama on my DS. Next morning, we're at breakfast, and my sister mentions that she was up half the night because she thought she saw someone silhouetted against the wall of her room, but when she turned on the light, there was no one there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience. We checked out that day, so I didn't get to experience anything after that, but it still freaks me out to this day. End quote. Oh man, Europe is historically an ancient and painful place. I mean, it's as equally beautiful, but where I couldn't even count how many haunted locations there are, not represented in just one country like Germany, but all of them, all around, in all varieties of cultures and forms of society. Germany is home to many folklores, tales, legends, and paranormal encounters. Old buildings that have housed many families over the centuries that still stand or get renovated to modern standards. They can still hold the energies of the past. Lots of people talk about how the grounds, a new build could be on a location, but the grounds themselves were the home of battles and murders and all these different things throughout history. And so there is still that dark manifestation that exists there, even though you put up a brand new apartment building or something. At the end of the day, it just might not matter. But those are just homes or old buildings where they may hold pain and death, but not all are like that. You have hospitals filled with a lot of death, emotional pain, a degree of fear too. I would be curious if there is anything demonic associated with hospitals out there, like hospice or nursing homes, but I wouldn't doubt it. And perhaps I will investigate that further in another episode, demonic activity in hospitals. You want to run down abandoned hospitals, which there is a lot of them. But as far as standard hauntings go, I have an interesting encounter to share here, and I quote, "My first day job, I worked at a particularly unsettling location in Iowa. It was an old hospital that was converted into a care facility. Think of a school built in the 1950s. A lot of granite, brick, and sturdy ceramic. Just beautiful. And I've read that it has since been torn down and replaced with a new facility. So, one day, a lady resident is dying, getting near the end, and is in and out of consciousness. Just past the foot of her bed is a sink and counter that, along with her regular bathroom items, held a small glass of water. When this resident would come to, she'd point to the end of the bed and mumble comments about how the little girl was going to knock over the glass of water. Then we had to tell her to stop playing around because she was going to make a mess. And eventually, this resident slipped into unconsciousness. The nurse, an older woman herself who had been in role for decades, had seen it all. And I are sitting there making small talk, waiting for the inevitable when the glass of water slides off the counter. The nurse doesn't even seem to notice. I, on the other hand, a 19-year-old guy who was mildly freaked out, began to ask the nurse if she saw it too. Now I was cut off by her saying, "Let's just focus on our patient, shall we?" I pulled myself together and tried to think about my job, but I was kind of losing it. The cup was inches away from the edge of the counter, and nobody was in the room with us. The resident eventually died, and we did our thing. Fast forward a few hours later. The way the hallways are set up, it looked like a very big T, and at the top of the T, where the two halls formed a perpendicular meet. That's where the nurse's station was. That's where I had to camp out most of the evening. Everyone was in bed, and I had time to kill between rounds. The nurse was on the floor doing something. Another floor, and I was all alone. If you looked to the ceiling at the point where the two halls met, you'd see a circular mirror. It was so that you could see down all the hallways at once from the front desk. Now, eventually, my peripheral picked up movement. I looked up to the mirror. Right there in the middle of the hall, about 15 yards behind me, was the little girl. She looked about 6, with a little sundress and long brown hair, and she was doing this slow, random dance that little girls sometimes do, without seeming to have a care in the world. I lost my shit. I stood up, walked around the entrance to the nurse's station while holding my hand up to the right side of my head so that I couldn't see down the hall, and bolted for the stairs. I found the nurse and told her what I saw. She laughed and admitted that over the years a lot of residents had seen the little girl and that I had nothing to worry about. It took me a couple hours to calm down, and then the next couple of years I continued to work there. I never saw her again. End quote. I've come across a few reports like this where someone starts a new job, moves into a new department, starts to notice things. You think, hey, am I losing my mind? But the staff then tell you, oh, that's just the norm. You're safe. It's all good. Now, of course, me personally, I believe not all spirits are here to cause harm. I think some, in a weird way, are trapped. But how do we ever deduce or learn about that? I mean, it's next to impossible. It could be, for example, though, and this is an analogy that I like to employ for describing something like this, and I'm bringing it up in conversation, which isn't often. Not a lot of people like to talk about these things. But I digress. So, you're walking on a sandy beach and you leave a footprint on the sand. Well, maybe ghosts are that footprint of those who come before, and for whatever reason, the water hasn't washed away that footprint yet. So it stands there in the sand, this footprint, for people that come along later and they see that footprint there. Maybe that's the same with paranormal. These people were here once before and they've since passed on or moved on, and so there's just these footprints that they've left behind and you see them. Now, one notable place that I covered, it's similar to this, though it's called the Bevan House in Nanaimo, which is located on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And the staff who work there, they are very much used to the haunted occurrences that take place. It's nothing demonic or nothing harming, but it's just got some paranormal occurrences, one with a child, similar to this, where, they're doing their own things. Sometimes things will move around, and that is it. That is the extent of the haunting. Now, for our last encounter of the show, it's a mix of humor and horror, but it reminds us of our strengths. And I quote, "The house I lived in when I was younger was haunted, including the two homes beside us as well. Now, these are experiences from my mother. The sound of furniture dragging upstairs while we were asleep. My parents were split, but my dad used to come over, and one night they were watching TV, and the noises started. My dad asked what we were doing. My mom said, oh, the kids are asleep. It's the ghosts. He laughed until he went upstairs to tell us to knock it off, but we were sleeping. The tap would run on its own. Eventually, my mom just yelled out, hey, turn it off. And it turned off. The basement was insanely creepy. I never went down there. Then my uncle had lived with us for a few months. He'd hear footsteps all night. My black lab would just pee everywhere if we tried to get her to go down there. My brother was lying in bed one night, though. The door had opened, and he says that he saw 3 shadow people float into my bedroom. Now, I never slept in my room. I always slept with my mom because the attic was in my room. And I'd wake up screaming any time I slept in there. I guess that's why. Now, my mom made friends with the neighbors. She was a Portuguese grandmother who spoke very broken English. She asked my mom one day, is your house haunted? My mom never said anything about our experiences, but she asked the lady why she was asking. She then told my mom that her granddaughter was seeing things that she brushed off as her being a kid, until she was in the kitchen one day and her freezer door flew open and a slab of ground meat went flying across the room. It slammed against the wall, and they had moved out about 2 months later. Now, another family moved into that same house, and my mom made friends with them. Never told them about the previous family. The daughter, maybe 3 years old, would sit on the stairs and talk to the wall. My mom asked her mom why, and the mom said that the little girl talks to the shadows. End quote. I want to highlight something here. So now, the notion that their mother told a resident spirit to stop turning the tap water on and that it listened, we can only speculate and form our own opinions until we somehow find definitive proof of anything regarding paranormal. But heck, I don't know how we're going to do that. I digress anyways. Spirits, I would assume, want to communicate. And when they make contact, it's probably like a drug for them. But I firmly believe in our strength as a physically manifested spirit and our words having power. I think that's why, depending what you believe, certain godly affiliated phrases carry so much weight behind them in religious and paranormal practices, because we give words meaning. And with that meaning, they carry power. and that power is strong. To quote once again, I've said this many a time before on shows, a famous wizard, words are, in my not so humble opinion, our most inexhaustible source of magic, capable of both inflicting injury and remedying it. That's Albus Dumbledore, and he gets it to a T, highlighting the power and potential of words to be both destructive and healing. Paranormal forces are also subject to these things, in my interpretation, which is why in some scenarios when you're dealing with darker forces, you do not invite them. You verbally state you do not give them permission to follow or attach to you, and you believe in your worms. You believe in your words as you firmly declare this, which the mother no doubt did to put a stop to her tap being turned on. I'm cautiously awaiting the day that I'll find my little one talking to the wall. She's done the odd peculiar thing. I mentioned this before, like she always would point at the same corner of her room in the darkness when she'd wake up, and then she just mumbles about it. I've never noted anything outside of that or anything of serious concern. Thought it was curious, but that's as far as it's gone. And as she gets older, I've noticed it's starting to stop. That was the concept for one of our episodes, actually, though prior was the notion of what children can see with their eyes that we can't. Which, rest assured, they see and feel a lot more than we do. Which is, of course, no fault of ours. It's just the way things are for the majority of us as we get older and we're faced with life, the stresses and the concerns and the worries. I feel like it's kind of like a inhibitor that kind of does something to our brains. Because when you're a kid and you come into this world, you're so open-minded and more accepting to change and adapting and so many different things. And I can only imagine that's like a magnet for anything demonic or paranormal out there that's just trying to form some bridge of communication. But I digress. These things that pop up and don't cause harm, and then there are things that do pop up and do cause harm. In the story that I shared earlier, where this thing had pulled the ankle about a few feet down their bed of the one child, it reminds me of a scenario that my uncle and my aunt had in one of their homes, and that was something that I had done a long time ago, an episode on it, because my uncle shared this story, and I thought, wow, I did not know this. He was away at work, and my aunt was home alone, and she felt like something was on top of her, and she opened her eyes, and there was this figure just hovering above her while she was strapped, and she was held down in her bed and she couldn't move. And then the lights turned on as she reached her arm and reached her arm over to the lamp, flicked the switch, and then the lights came on and it was gone. And later that night, she refused to sleep. She saw it again in the corner of her room. She would call my uncle while he was away, and just like we couldn't figure it out. She was terrified, wouldn't stay there. And then there were other scenarios where these things would just walk down the hall, just a shape, and just like, oh my gosh, like what the heck did I just see? So there are some locations that have strong energies associated with them, stronger than other places. In Canada, it's very, very young. We don't have old buildings here. Of course, maybe a couple centuries, but that's it. When you're looking at Europe, like I said earlier, old buildings, old history. So you have to be careful, and you have to remember your words carry power, and you do not want to give in onto the terms of something else that's a little bit more sinister. But there are lots of non-sinister spirits out there too, some that are just lingering. But anyways, I'm rambling. I digress. That is it for this week. Thank you for tuning in to our episode of Cryptid Clues. We'll be back next week with more discussions and topics. So remember, check out our feeds for more content. And should you wish to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. So until next time, everyone, remember, take care and stay safe.